My name is Pete Cooney. I am the manager of data architecture at Jackson National Life in Lansing, Michigan. I'll tell you a bit more about myself and these gentlemen in a second. Jackson National is a 62-year-old insurance-based retirement product company. Our focus is annuities, variable annuities, fixed annuities, other retirement products. And we all sit in the technology organization in Jackson, and we are responsible for different aspects of use of data at Jackson. In particular, again, I'm the manager of data architecture in the data organization. We have a distinct data organization at Jackson, and my team is responsible for the strategy around our enterprise data platform and our enterprise data model. I'm happy to take questions about that later if you like. Chris, why don't you talk about yourself?
Hi, I'm Chris. I'm the product. Ooh, that's bad. I'm Chris. I'm the product owner for the data science and artificial intelligence teams. I do have a background in data science, but lately, as a product owner, my primary responsibility has been driving value from the products that we're creating, trying to understand how they fit into the ecosystem in general. And more often than not, I find myself coaching customers on what to expect with data science and what we need out of them to complete data science, artificial intelligence solutions.
Internal customers, right?
Yes, yes, thank you, internal customers.
There you go. And Mike.
All right. And I'm Mike Boggs. I'm Director for Architecture and Governance within Jackson's data department. And we really look at the data strategy, the way that we're implementing our enterprise data platform, the way that we're implementing our rules and standards and guardrails and all that kind of stuff there. And we also connect it into the business process engineering, business architecture, and process automation worlds.
Good. Now, you didn't come here to listen to us talk about ourselves, though, for an hour. You probably want to hear a little bit more about next generation data. So, Mike, tell me a little bit more what next generation thinking means related to the cloud and related to data in the cloud.
All right. When we talk about next generation data, what we've done is we've taken a look at our data that sits within the different systems that we have. And all those systems are out there, and of course it's 60-plus-year-old company, so there's a lot of them. And what we've done is we're really on a journey of transitioning thinking. And so we're trying to transition that thinking from the focus on the particular system into the entity, the actual data that someone's looking at. And the cloud really helps us be able to do that because it removes a lot of barriers that a lot of those systems were reliant upon. And so when we're talking about next generation, by being able to break out of that system mold and not have to worry about the Oracle data, the Workday data, we can take a look and we can work with our partners in the other parts of the business focused upon what data they need. We need customer data. We need financial data. It could be in 12 different systems. It doesn't really matter. And we're starting to put together strategies to be able to carry that out.
Now, how does the cloud help drive that?
The cloud helps because we really remove a lot of the system barriers that we had. We have the particulars of the rules that sit within one system and the rules that sit within another system. And what we've done is we started putting together an enterprise data model, and we have created a data lake out in the cloud, and we have put our data out there following that model. So we have a structure where we ingest that data in, and then we look at it and we transform it so that it doesn't matter what system it came from. We're now just looking at customer data. We're looking at product data. We're looking at whatever. And in the cloud, the nice part about that is that the storage costs are fairly low. The ability to have all of that information centralized and be able to scale as we need it is another very nice benefit of that.
Not to mention the tools, right? So Chris, how does this kind of cloud strategy, data strategy impact AI and the way we do AI?
if you do your cloud strategy right, when you're putting the data into the cloud, hopefully you are building in your checks, your validations, building in the process when you put it into the cloud. Mike mentioned the other day to me, I'm going to steal his wording, it's a shift in your mindset. You can't simply take your data from on-prem and drop it into the cloud and expect that it's going to solve your problems. It might solve a few problems, sure, but really it's about getting data, getting the process and governance around data into a place that is easily accessible, that has integrity, and that's reliable. Mike also started touching on an important point about the data organization that you have going into the cloud. When you put the data in, it's important that you need to be intentional about it. Understand how you're structuring it and where everything is located. If you can get to an entity-based model, Mike was mentioning some things about a customer or what certain things are. If you can get to an entity-based model in the long run, that's the ideal state. But even if you're not getting to that level of maturity, if you can organize your data, reduce the amount of duplication, and especially get rid of some of that overlap from legacy systems, that's where you can really start building good AI solutions. What you don't want is to have your data scientists and AI engineers tapping into 3, 4, or 5 different legacy systems, trying to manually track this data lineage that is probably not documented. It's frustrating. I've got one of my AI engineers who's smiling right now, laughing about that, because that's what we do. And obviously, you have to do what you have to do to get things done in the short term, but hopefully your cloud strategy gets everything into the cloud and organized.
Okay, so talking about, and I also want to point out, a lot of the tooling is also in the cloud, which again makes for more cost efficiencies. We can talk more about that if you like. So it's great that we've got this cloud strategy using this new technology, but who drives this? Who really should drive this to succeed, especially in experience we've had here?
Yep, that's a very good question. When we're doing this kind of transformation, and that's really what we're doing, because again, we're trying to change mindset. We're trying to change thinking patterns. That is not something that the technology group can do in a vacuum. That is not something that the technology group can, in reality, lead. This has to be a partnership across the whole enterprise. And so in our case, we have established that, and we've established a model for governance, and we've established a model for stewardship, and we are working directly with those business leaders across the organization in order to accomplish these goals.
So these are not technology data owners?
Not at all. All of our data owners, I guess technically technology has a data owner too, because we have data, but all of the different owners are from the different departments across the organization and our executives within those departments.
And what's kind of the output of, what's the benefit of that kind of business ownership, business partnership?
In our case, what we were trying to achieve was really having that true sense of ownership of their data. The business processes that they carry out in their different divisions are reliant upon their data. And we don't want them to think of their data as something external to them. It is something internal to their department. It is something that they live and breathe on a daily basis. And so we wanted to really instill that sense of ownership in them, as well as within our technology side. We want to make sure that the technologists also understand that it is their data, not your data.
And now this all sounds great. What does it have to do with the cloud again?
The cloud just kind of makes all of this a lot easier. One thing we definitely did not want to do a lift and shift model. We're not trying to just take things as they are, bring them up to the cloud. There are some benefits to that when it comes to scalability and things, but we were looking at the transformative effect of it. That once we do that, it becomes a lot easier to share that data. It becomes a lot easier to access that data. And that can be internal partners, external partners, whatever. But it makes all of that a lot easier. It simplifies the whole infrastructure. And of course, the scalability is nice too.
I wanted to jump in on the data science and AI side. When Mike mentioned that the ownership of the data is important, making sure our business customers know they own the data. it's equally as important for them to understand that any output from our AI and data science models, our ML models, they own that as well. And they need to feel ownership of it. And without that ownership, without them having access, having a clear understanding of the data that's going in and the data coming out, then you lose engagement, and it's not nearly as valuable in the long run.
And also, you can keep that on. Also, you were talking about the need to be able to aggregate data, improve quality of data. How does the business ownership play into that?
It really comes to a shared understanding. The data scientists, ML practitioners, AI engineers, we have to understand the business data. We have to have an intimate knowledge of it, but no matter how much we study this data, we don't have the same understanding that our business partners do. Now, obviously, the dynamic is different depending on whether your AI data science teams are embedded within the business or if they are in a department on their own or an IT. Different dynamic, but it's still critical that we have a very close relationship, so not only do we understand the context of the data, but anything that's happening in the business world that could impact our data, we have to understand that for our models, and we will not get that context without having a very close relationship with somebody who feels ownership of that data and understands how the external environment is going to impact the underlying data set.
Okay, while talking about that, that understanding, you also brought up quality, stability in a data set. Talk more about how the importance of that and how our cloud setup helps with that.
Sure. The stability and consistency of the data set, consistent data allows the building of consistent models on top of that data. You know, if you consider data that's volatile, if you're constantly going back and trying to figure out when the last time it was refreshed, if you're concerned about duplicate or missing data, then it's going to be very difficult to build a trustworthy and accurate model. You're going to have to be constantly checking the pipelines, checking the data, and more often than not, it ends up being your data scientists, your AI engineers and practitioners who are going back and doing this checking. When they're doing that, you're basically in maintenance mode. And at that point, when you're in maintenance mode, you're not adding value to your company. Now, sure, the maintenance is important. I think we can all agree you have to have some sort of maintenance, but when you are going into the cloud and building data governance into the process, going into the cloud, that's going to lift a huge burden off of your ML practitioners' shoulders so they can get back to what they do best. And that is be creative, come up with creative solutions, find problems to solve, and build models. When was the last time that you heard a data scientist say, "I love cleaning data sets"? I'm sure there's a few of you data wranglers out there that enjoy it, but I'll tell you, you're a little bit weird and you are the minority. Most of us data scientists want to build models. That's what we do. If you take that governance and that maintenance off of our shoulders, we're going to be happier, we're going to produce better models and provide more value. And if you don't, that can lead to burnout. And that's a serious problem. If you talk to anyone in the industry, do any research, you see that data scientists often get burnt out because of the amount of maintenance that they have to do, pipeline building. Let's take that off our shoulders and put that into the cloud.
So this sounds like a lot of work for the business. How do you build buy-in and trust from the business to kind of to cooperate with this process?
Sure. Building buy-in and trust with the business, I mean, it's like we go back to our keynote and talking about all these things of being honest. You know, and when we work with our various business partners out there, we're doing so in a way where we're not necessarily trying to, you know, just present something to them and get them to rubber stamp it and move on. We're trying to work with them from the perspective of understanding what their problems are. What are the different types of uses of the data that they need? And they prioritize that, and we build our plans based upon that. And we build the way that we're going about our stewardship and all that based upon that. So we focus a lot on what their business needs really are and on understanding them and setting context and getting the context for where our data is going to be used and how.
And how does that help you with AI?
Can you elaborate on the question?
Sure.
Sure. To phrase it a little bit differently, when you build that kind of trust, how does it help you with some of the end goals you're talking about?
By far, I'm a little biased speaking as a product owner, but at least for me, by far, the most important aspect of building trust is that we can get to an understanding of what our customer really needs. I'm sure all of you have seen it at some point. Somebody asks for something, they say, "This is what I want." Is that really what they want? Is that really what they need? Without that trust, it's very difficult to get past those initial barriers of shiny object, or I'm doing this for political reasons or to make myself look good. When you have that trust, you can really get down into what does the customer need, how can I make their lives easier? And I'm speaking mostly about internal customers, but I think we can say universally, when you have that trust, you can really get to how can you help somebody else. And the root of data science is making people's lives easier, being more efficient with what we have. So it's critical to understand what they need. To be able to get to that value, we need to have that trust so that we can build effective and valuable models.
Side editorial. If it sounds like we're talking a lot about human factors in a conversation around the cloud, congratulations, you're reaching part of the point of this. Half the genius of the cloud, and I'll let you talk more about this a second if you don't mind. Part of the genius of the cloud is freeing you from details that you didn't realize were weighing you down until you're free of them. Have any of you use a lawn service? Okay. I like that. Yeah, do you miss mowing the lawn now that you got a lawn service? Yeah, and that's a similar kind of experience technologically when we move out of on-premise worlds or even some outsourced situations to an owned cloud, is that you have a sense of empowerment that you didn't before. And that's a really huge transitional step, which is why you can start thinking about some of these things like, I don't know, practical governance in a way that you hadn't been able to before. Speaking of which, talk about our data strategy and how it helps us to actually, how it really led to the governance approach and the connection between the two, if you don't mind.
Absolutely, but first I'm going to expand on one of the things you were talking about, and that is that from the business perspective, why the cloud? About 15 years ago, was part of a panel discussion on why move to the cloud at a conference. And one of the things that we're talking about is that the scalability, the ability to not have to set up your data center to handle seasonal issues and to be able to handle those I have to make sure that this works on this one day out of the year, therefore it has to be huge enough to do that. And at the time, a lot of the discussion was from the technology side of, well, this is kind of a little bit of a fad because we have all these security concerns and we have all of these different connectivity concerns and all that. And like I said back then, I said, all of those things are obstacles to be overcome when you're looking at it from a business and a business owner's perspective of something that can be 100 times cheaper. So once you're getting into those kinds of scale, it changes the whole calculus of that, where it's no longer that we're talking about, well, we wouldn't do this because of this. It's going to be, we're going to do this, and we have to consider these things. And so that's one of the things about the business empowerment of the cloud. Now, when it comes to the cloud data and the business side of it, it's very similar where these individual systems now we can take that thinking and evolve it into, now we're talking about these entities, these are the focus of what they've got. Now they can think about the real data sharing needs and how are they going to go about that? Who in the company needs this data? Who outside of the company needs this data? How are they going to get it? How are we going to partition that? What of this kind of data do people need more generally? What of this kind of data needs to be more secured? And so all of those kind of considerations are now where they look at versus having to figure out how to do it for these 12 different systems that are in their ecospaces.
And to that end then, Chris, that kind of business mentality, how have you noticed it adjusting the way that people have talked about ML, NLP, things like that in the last couple of years?
Well, the first thing that I've noticed is a lot more excitement around the ability to access data. It's no longer, hey, I heard about this data that's in this system that you have to talk to this person about and then use this type of technology to access it. It's there, and we have internal customers saying, when can I access this data? And I can't remember ever hearing that much excitement around data. Just the fact that it's there and that they can trust it. Once people start getting excited about the data, they start understanding what you can do with it. They start thinking more creatively themselves, and they're much more likely to be willing to adopt or at least hear about AI and data science solutions. They start understanding what we're talking about, and they start understanding the base data that we need. They understand it, and they start saying, we want to do more with this. And how do you do more? Advanced analytics.
So, general question for both of you guys. What has been the hardest thing about adoption of the cloud and AI at Jackson so far? We haven't rehearsed this part, so this is going to be fun.
Yeah, I like that. I think the hardest thing is really kind of conveying what that vision is and for people to really believe that it's possible. And it's like in the structure that we set up, we went about it by saying, okay, we're going to take all this data out of these systems, we're going to ingest it into our data lake, we're going to create an enterprise data model that covers everything that we need. And a lot of people just kind of went, yeah, right. And there's a lot of different technologies out there to assist with this, but it really becomes kind of overcoming that inertia and really kind of getting people to believe that what we're talking about is possible. And that once we do that, understanding the benefits of it. It's like once we have that enterprise model, then a lot of that analytics layer that sits on top of that becomes much more elementary now. And you don't have to have all of these little specific rules built into all of these different data sets. It becomes a lot easier to do now. That's where the economies of scale come into play.
One quick qualifier. We started adopting our data platform very early in our cloud journey. This would have been a lot harder if we'd been 10 years in. But the timing really made it feasible for us to look at this kind of more centralized approach. How about you? What's the biggest barrier you've seen to sort of people's understanding and or ability to adopt ML and other AI tech?
It's slow. It's really, really slow building out a data platform and building out data governance and policy. It has to be. Like I mentioned before, you have to be intentional about it. But I don't think I anticipated as I mentioned before, the excitement around the data and what's coming. I haven't seen that before. I did not anticipate how many people wanted to jump in and start doing this. It used to be, we need some data, let's just throw it to our analysts, wait, and we'll get it back. And now everybody wants to get involved. I'll qualify that with, it's a great problem to have because we're getting more support and we have a vision of where we're going. But it's a slow process, and you can't skip steps. You have to be very intentional about where you're going. And I'm going to divert it for just a moment and mention one of the big advantages that we see coming, but again is slow and we have to be very intentional about, is once you start building ML models, it's really important to understand how all your data is connected. I suppose that's important anyway. But once you start building these ML models, it's important to understand how the output of those models is going to impact your underlying data set. So let's say, for example, you build a recommendation engine. Do you think that's going to impact your sales and product data? Yeah, it absolutely is. You start recommending products, your customers are going to start buying those products, and I don't want to say you're going to get a skewed data set, but it's going to change your data. Well, what happens if you build another AI model that starts recommending, based on preferences, recommending products that you can build for your customers? Well, if you start recommending a type of product, your customers start buying that, then your other model is going to, your product model is going to look at this and think, well, that's customer preference, and start recommending those types of products. So it's all interconnected. And one of the things that we're really excited for, but is also a challenge, is to figure out how we're going to understand the ecosystem and how the data is connected and how models impact each other. That is probably going to be one of the larger, I don't want to say hurdles, it's just very difficult to plan out. There's going to be a lot of power in there. We're going to be able to do a lot with it, but we have to start socializing with customers that, hey, now our data's in there. Now you really have to start understanding how the models and the data impact each other. So I suppose that's the next challenge that's coming up. But again, that's a good challenge to have, because if we're at that point, then we're doing something right.
So you brought up something important I want to hone in on. So it takes time for data science to build models. Why not use AutoML?
I both love and hate that question. So AutoML, and I'll say this for any tool that has automatic modeling capabilities built in, whether it's AutoML, whether it's the modeling capabilities going into Click, whether it's Data Robot. Those are great tools that can augment what you are currently doing. There is an inherent risk that a lot of these tools don't natively build in the governance that needs to be there. We talked about being intentional about building the process and building the governance when you go into your cloud strategy. These tools, it's so easy to just drop in a data set and get a result that looks like it might be useful, that looks neat, and start using it. I'm not accusing anyone of doing that. I'm just saying that that is a risk. But as long as you're intentional about how you're using it, it can be a great tool to augment what you're doing. The example I give to somebody is, if you come up to me and ask me for a pencil to do your homework, I'm not going to withhold the pencil because there's a chance you're going to shove that pencil up your nose. That's not a good reason to withhold it. I just make sure you're using it for the correct purposes. AutoML, if you're going to use it, just don't use it in a way that it's not meant. Make sure that you understand the data going in. Make sure that whoever the customer is understands what's coming out of it. And make sure that you've got the checks in place wherever that data is stored. Make sure that you understand what that data is and what the risks are.
And the other factor I think it's worth noting is that we're in a heavily regulated industry. We can't use self-training ML. I mean, every single model of ours has to be explainable, and so from that standpoint, you can take an entire swath of tools off of our table that we can't really effectively use. Ran into this at other places I've worked as well, and so you have to be more deliberate about your use of tools given your circumstance. I envy startups some days because they can play with toys that I can't.
Yes, that is very true, and I'm glad you mentioned that, but I would also highly encourage anyone who's not in a highly regulated industry, even though there might not be the same financial penalties, consider the ethics around what you're doing, whether it's the potential for bias or even the risk tolerance of what is coming out of it. If you're, let's say you're in medical and it's a cancer diagnosis, that is literally a life and death situation, right? So you have a very low risk tolerance. Okay, well, what if you're just building a recommendation engine? Certainly a much lower tolerance, but you still have to understand, a much higher risk tolerance, but you have to understand what's coming out of that and what the potential ramifications are. Are you discriminating against any certain demographic? Or if you start recommending poor, inappropriate products, could that damage your brand's reputation? So certainly be more careful when you're in a highly regulated industry, but whatever you're doing, just consider the ethical ramifications of it.
Appreciate that. Okay. This is the part of the show where we take your questions. So if you have a question, I'll bring the microphone out to you so we can record things. So, and these guys are right in front, so I have the shortest walk, so therefore you win.
Hi, thanks for that, the pencil explanation. I'm turning just for the speaker. How much effort do you put into making sure your solution, that pencil that you're about to give, is going to be self-served by your customer?
I don't think I can emphasize how much we actually do. A ton. And part of it is because we are in a highly regulated industry, but also we as a product owner, I am heavily focused on ensuring that we're delivering value. And if that self-service aspect isn't there, if we're not delivering something that they want, then we've likely failed or missed the mark. But right from the beginning, we start talking with the customer. What is it that you need? We actually put a lot of effort into understanding how the customer is going to physically interact with the output. We have, and I have to share a lot of credit here, we have a team of business process engineers that we have tapped into that right at the beginning, the instantiation of this project, once we've decided what the general thing we're trying to solve is, we bring in the business process engineers to map out what the current process is and figure out how this input is going to actually be used, how it's going to slide into the current process without causing disruption but providing value. So we put a lot of effort into making sure that it is, one, it's usable for the purpose, and two, that there are not other unintended consequences. You know, like, as I mentioned, models interacting with each other and impacting each other. We of course do some very, very heavy bias analyses to make sure that there's no bias or and reduce the risk of our models.
I also want to give props to Mike because he's the first person I've known who's taken the time to integrate data and process. He actually has both reporting to him in the same org. Yeah, you can grab his mic.
Just adding one thing to it, like Chris was saying, our business process engineers go in and map out that process and all that. But there's another step as well, and that is that we don't want to take what is an ineffective or inefficient process and just automate it. So before we do that, we also go through a process optimization step. And a lot of times we can add a lot of value just by doing that before we do anything with any technology.
I was just wondering how, when you mentioned trying to help the end user understand what they're asking for, how do you do that in a streamlined fashion without, you know, there's turnover and there's change and that, and then it seems like you're, at least for me, it seems like I'm performing the same 101 class over and over to the end user.
There is no streamlined way, to put it simple. It really does come back to building trust. And as our keynote talked about earlier, it's all about that trust. And unfortunately, when there is turnover, which we experience a lot because AI ML project is often months to years in the building, so there is turnover, and sometimes you just have to start over. But I think it comes down to empathy. If all you care about is your model and what you can show off, you're probably already in the wrong direction. It really comes down to caring about how it's being used, caring about your customers and wanting to make their life easier. And if you can connect over empathy, then you can accomplish it.
No, I will say for the larger data platform, we're definitely getting past the I want to keep doing the same 101 over again strategy. So we're going to be putting out a whole video series, and we have a nice internal training department, so we're going to record some video series. They'll probably force me to be pithy and short. And
Funneling of the information like you're asking for, at least taking some swings at, like, hey, you must ask for it in this application or this format, or
he's asking if there are any ways we funnel it by kind of asking if we want data in this information, this format. In terms of the data platform, no. Getting people to cooperate in the first place was bad enough a battle. Now that they're at the table, we'll meet you in the middle. Our mainframe data ingestion is a whole other epic story for another day.
These guys are saints for the amount of patience that they have with the people that they work with. These guys are saints.
But when it comes to end user consumption, which is a whole other talk, which maybe we'll give it another year, but in data consumption. Then you can point people to training and point people to existing process, and you can go through a lot more normal governance once you get it there. Again, I think we're, especially in our regulated industry, like 5 years away from having a more streamlined way of doing that. There's a lot of work out there to get it done. It's just how much of it can I use in my constraint. Other questions?
Hi, I'm Taylor. My question is based off of my experience from different roles at different companies. You have times where your data is touched by numerous amounts of people who go from have absolutely no idea what data is and how accurate it has to be to people who have like higher understanding than myself or even higher people above them. So how do you, when you are getting the data and you're trying to actually make data structures or governments or stuff like that, how do you try to tell people you have to be as accurate as possible, you can't skew it, like how do you try to work with data that you already know majority of the time is dirty data?
That's Pete's job. They come to me, I say, hey, Pete, go.
Oh, no, I'm going to make my boss talk about that one. You can give the mic, give the mic to Mike.
Yeah, now we're getting into the topic of kind of true data literacy. And one of the things that we are doing is we've been putting together a data literacy program to really increase that across the whole organization. And so understanding what that data is, understanding what that data is for, understanding where there are pitfalls, because not all data is of equal quality, all of those kind of things. And again, this is where our connection with all these different parts of the business become very important, because again, the stewardship of that data, that's also not a technical function. That is a business function. And so determining who can get to what data, what prerequisites they have to have in order to do that, all of those kind of things fall down to those business partners. The quality and the maintenance of quality is one of their key responsibilities, because everything has to be at least at a base level of quality to be useful. But then it gets into whatever particular purpose you have for that data, that quality potentially increases. That is the minimal level that has to be there. And so those processes come through the business because, again, they're the owners of their data. Once they're the owners of their data, they now have that sense of ownership and sense of pride that goes along with it and wanting to have that quality.
And I think local ownership by departments is key in that regard too, because frankly, they have different kinds of pain points. If you're dealing with a marketing or sales department with a CRM with zero quality checks in what they enter, it's a different kind of conversation explaining. You go to them and say, your data is not very good because you don't have constraints. They're like, so? I'm getting it done. Look at my sales last month. It's fantastic. But then you go and give their data to the people who on your actuarial department, in my case, who are supposed to, I don't know, predict our risk and, create products that will actually make us money. And they look at the same data and say, you've spelled the same person's name 3 times, and I can't treat them as 3 people. You need to fix this. Those kinds of situations are where the dialogue and the data governance level is really, really key, because it makes people wake up to the fact that their data has impact on other people, because you don't generally know that when you're dealing with local applications, right? Functional applications, you live in that little world, and you live in the reporting that hinges off of that world, and you have no idea the pain you're causing people in another group by doing the same thing. And sometimes those problems aren't solvable. We have a mainframe system. Mainframe system's older than I am. And there are certain things I'm not gonna be able to change about that mainframe system. But we can at least suggest some things to help them move in the right direction, and then help them clean up their data with their own rules, with the business's own rules after the fact. So, other questions? Gentleman in front.
Hi, I'm Vijayan Sugumaran. I'm going to approach it from a slightly different angle. So obviously I'm from a university. So data literacy obviously is a big issue. And so we teach, data modeling, data cleaning up and all that stuff. So within Jackson, what are some of the tools and technologies that you use? And also, how do we train students to be, job ready? Can you address that?
It's a good question, and I appreciate the fact of coming at it from the university perspective, because you're asking your customer what they need. So in our case, we tend to be pretty much a Microsoft shop. We have standardized on Azure as our cloud technology. We use a bunch of different particular tools, but without getting into the particular products and all that, because that's not really what's most important. I think what's most important is understanding, and especially for someone coming through the graduation program from a data perspective, understanding data modeling, understanding the relationship of data, understanding the relationship of data to its underlying business processes that it supports. Those are some of the things that I would say are going to be fundamental. And data modeling is a rather difficult task, and so the more that we can get people understanding that, the better.
One of the structural things that we've done pretty well at is, I think Mike had mentioned earlier, we have a data group, and that has made a huge difference in the way that we talk about data and building the capabilities. Just the shared language from within the group. There's a lot of different ways to build data literacy, and be intentional about it, do what works for your organization. But one of the biggest advantages, one of the biggest things that you can do is to have some sort of a data group, whether it's structural or even if it's a community of practice. Make sure that people are close to each other, whether it's video or physical. Make sure that they're meeting so that they can have a shared understanding of what the business is trying to accomplish with data, and be open and honest about where the organization is as far as maturity. If you go into a company like Jackson, it's going to be different from a small startup. There are going to be different capabilities and different levels of maturity, and it's critical to understand where the company is so that these students coming out of university can say, okay, I know where the general industry is, this is how we compare. That gives them the frame of reference so that they can understand what we're trying to do.
So I don't have a lawn service, but that analogy kind of resonated with me. I'd like to have a cleaning service and a laundry service and like a meal service. Like, how do you decide when to buy versus build?
Yeah, the buy versus build is always an interesting question. For example, I would not want to build all the infrastructure for maintaining a data lake. Those are things that are not really a focus that we need to have. Really, it's a matter of looking at the overall underlying business architecture. What are the capabilities that your organization has, and what are the capabilities it does well? What are the critical capabilities that it needs to do well in order to succeed, and that it's really vital that everyone in the organization is very good at those capabilities. The other ones are things that can be, to some degree, outsourced. And so when we get into those kind of things, we can look at, is there something out there that is not necessarily my absolute core competency? It's like Pete was talking about actuarial and with the actuarial models and things like that. That's a pretty difficult thing to actually bring in, because there's a lot of individual factors that come in that can get very company specific on that. But when we talk about some of these more general capabilities and being able to look at these different tools, like, for example, it is not in our best interest to build a CRM from the ground up. That's not something that would fit into our core competencies. We need to use one, and we need to use one on every single day. But so I would say that looking at those business capabilities and kind of doing that little mapping is where I start looking at the buy versus build decisions.
And we deliberately chose to make our data platform proprietary, fundamentally. So, because at the end of the day, we want our data to be our data. We want it to be our data layer to be in that distraction layer between us and the ever-changing field of vendors that we work with technologically. And that's a really important deal, because who's to say that one day you aren't going to use system number one, then switch over when the next CIO comes to system number two, or the next CFO, or the next fill in the blank O, right? Well, we have about 30 seconds left. Mike, any kind of closing thoughts?
Yeah, I think that, again, it's a matter of that next generation thinking, that shift in thinking, getting people out of their system constraints and really looking at things in terms of what their data is and what it's really for is kind of the key to making this journey work.
Make friends with the people who are building your data strategy. They're going to be huge allies. You can't do it without them. Make sure you're responsible and don't stick pencils up your nose.
Thank you very much.